Tonight on the Late Debate, the new Prime Minister is in the House, but what does Liz Truss mean for London? Energy woes, will the PM's package fit the bill? Bidding wars, tears and a rise in hidden homelessness. We lift the lid on London's renting crisis.
It was incredibly stressful. I was in tears about it most days.
Good evening and welcome to the Late Debate. It's been a long, hot summer for all of us, not least the two Tory candidates sweating it out to become our next Prime Minister. This week, Liz Truss appointed her cabinet and began to tackle a very challenging to-do list. Britain's new PM soon got into her stride. In the space of 48 hours, she moved into Downing Street.
I am confident that together we can ride out the storm.
She held her first cabinet and announced a plan to tackle gas and electricity bills.
A typical household will pay no more than £2,500 per year for each of the next 2 years while we get the energy market back on track.
She also faced Sir Keir Starmer, who wanted to know why she wouldn't impose a windfall tax on energy companies.
There's nothing new about a Tory Prime Minister who, when asked who pays, says it's you, the working people of Britain.
Well, there's nothing new about a Labour leader who is calling for more tax rises.
Some Prime Minister's questions were less hostile than others.
Can I ask my right honourable friend, why does she think it is that all three female Prime Ministers have been Conservative?
It is quite extraordinary, isn't it, that there doesn't seem to be the ability in the Labour Party to find a female leader, or indeed a leader who doesn't come from North London.
So why should the British public trust her to clean up the mess that she's helped create?
I'm determined that we deal with the issues facing us as a nation.
While Prime Minister Truss set out her stall, her predecessor was being more opaque.
Like Cincinnatus, I am returning to my plough.
And with that, Boris Johnson headed for the back benches. Joining me now to discuss that is the Green peer, Baroness Jenny Jones. For the Conservatives, it's the Minister for London and MP for Sutton and Cheam, Paul Scully. And for the Liberal Democrats, it's the Twickenham MP, Munira Wilson. Welcome, all of you. Paul, you must be pleased to survive the cull. You are one of, so far, only 4 London MPs to have made it into the government.
Yeah, I am, but I'm really pleased that Liz Truss is Prime Minister, and I'm really encouraged for what that means for London. Actually, she started off as a Greenwich councillor when she started her political career. And she's talked a lot about London at the end of her campaign, in particular in the London hustings and in the few days that we've had of her premiership. So I'm really encouraged.
Is Sir Keir Starmer right to challenge her over who pays for her energy package?
I think in terms of the energy package, look, I mean, the detail of the overall fiscal process and will come in over the next couple of weeks. But what she wanted to do today was signal what people can expect, to give them a degree of certainty in really uncertain times. But what she said is that we're in a real emergency footing. We're in effectively a war footing, with a war on the borders of Europe. So we've got to be up for that challenge.
Munira, you may have criticisms of the package, but something's better than nothing, isn't it?
Oh, well, absolutely. I welcome that finally, after weeks and weeks of not saying anything and suggesting that she wasn't up for giving any handouts, suddenly we have actually got a package. It still means that the average family household is going to see their bill doubling from last year. So it's not a freeze, it's a phony freeze. She's calling it a freeze, but it absolutely isn't. And millions of households are still going to be much worse off, to the tune of £500 or £600 more than the current cap, and double what they were paying last year. And the way it's being funded, I mean, the Liberal Democrats were the first to call for a windfall tax. We were the first to call for a freeze in the energy price cap. And I don't understand why Liz Truss is seeing that borrowing is the answer when oil and gas companies are making gargantuan profits that they weren't expecting to
Jenny,
make.
I'm not sure what you think of the actual package, but you must have been horrified to hear that fracking's back.
Yes, horrified, but I don't think that's going to happen simply because she put in a caveat about with local support, and clearly no local community is going to support it. It's dirty, it's
But isn't the idea
loud.
that those communities that do support it will be offered a discount on their energy bills? That might be quite attractive.
Well, it might be, but I suggest when they understand the damage that fracking can do, not only earthquakes and damage to the water system, but also the constant lorries up and down and that sort of thing, I think most communities, once they're enlightened, will see that fracking is not the answer.
Paul, do you think fracking will come back?
Well, I think Jenny's right to that. It is absolutely about local communities making those decisions, because we've seen in other countries that a mixed bag of things, that where it's worked in some areas, it's been not good in other areas. That we need absolutely to have the best protections for local communities, and they should have that final decision.
You mentioned earlier Liz Truss's connections with Greenwich as a councillor. What is she going to mean for London? I mean, what's she going to offer London?
Well, I think she realises that, first of all, that when we talked about levelling up and these kind of things, that London is very much of a partner in that London itself needs levelling up.
Because you're a levelling up minister.
I'm a local government minister in that department, and I was just talking to the new Secretary of State this morning, and it was really heartened to hear him talk about the fact that there's so much to do in London. So many of the wards in London are amongst the poorest wards in the country. The fact that you get such health inequalities in certain parts of London, so there's plenty to do here, but that's not in a conflict with the rest of the country, and so it's really good to hear that message.
But Paul, levelling up for this government has consistently meant levelling down London, and Liz Truss has been part of that government.
And certainly the allegation from
which I totally refute, to be fair.
For example, you've seen it with university funding. When Gavin Williamson was Education Secretary, he actually wrote in black and white, because of we're putting money into levelling up areas, we're taking money out of London-based universities. When we're looking at sports funding, a community pool in my constituency, Hampton Pool, looking for money for Sport England, they were told, no, we can't give you money because it's got to go to levelling up areas. So constantly we see that London is levelled down, even though, as you quite rightly say, we have got some of the poorest areas in the country, some of the poorest wards, not in my constituency, but right across the country.
There's also the fact that this cap is going to be far too high for many people, particularly in the poorest areas. Even people who are in jobs and working hard, they're still struggling with the cost of living.
Yeah, don't forget the source.
And the energy cap will be a real problem for them.
But there's also on top of the £37 billion support that's already going out. So over the summer, I was spending some of my time ringing up local authorities around the country to make sure they got that £150 going out through the council tax discounts, rebates. But also we've got the money that's going out directly onto energy bills. We've got the direct support that's gone out through universal credit. Now, clearly that was not going to be enough, which is why she's made the announcement today.
But why hasn't she talked about renewable? Renewable energy is the cheapest option.
Well, she has, because actually what she's been talking about is actually
talking about
increasing.
investing in oil and gas and in fracking. She doesn't have a clue about the climate crisis.
Well, because I mean, I saw Jacob Rees-Mogg, the new business secretary and energy secretary, talking about it today. About yes, we are talking about oil and gas, because it's a transition. Net zero is 2050. It's not tomorrow, much as we'd love it to be. So we need to move towards. We don't have the technology to have that, because wind is
because
fantastic.
12 years of Tory government.
No, wind is fantastic, but it only works when when wind's blowing. So you need to have the technology, the storage, and all of that capability in the North Sea, which we're developing, and we're attracting investment.
Why aren't you going for a really ambitious insulation programme, for instance?
Exactly.
I mean, that would help people reduce their energy costs, and it has environmental benefits, and it will create lots of jobs. It would be great for the economy. But just on today's package, the part for the public sector, so for schools and hospitals, was only for 6 months, and there's very little detail around it. I heard from a school in my constituency just a couple of weeks ago. Their energy bills are set to go up 5-fold, from 30,000 a year to 150,000 a year. And the Chair of Governors said to me, this is catastrophic for our finances, and teaching and learning is going to suffer. Children are going to suffer. Teachers will have to be sacked, presumably, for schools across the country to make...
And we don't know how she's going to pay for it. There's no detail.
6 months is just delaying the cliff edge.
But hold on a second, but look, you're right, Jenny, that you haven't had the full detail now, but, Munira was said, Liz didn't say anything over the summer. Lots of people saying she hasn't got a plan, and then, lo and behold, within 2 days she has got a plan, because she's been working on it. It's not that she's just come up with it in 2 days.
But what's going to happen in 6 months' time for schools and hospitals and care homes? We've got the fiscal
bed, we've got the mini budget coming up, which will have that detail. So let's see now at that point.
Munira, I'm not expecting you to endorse the new Prime Minister, but you must be glad to see the back of Boris Johnson.
Well, she's just continuity Johnson, isn't she? I mean, she's been in his government. She stood by him right to the end. She backed all of his decisions, even though she suddenly, over the summer, said she didn't agree with lots of things that she'd voted for instance, the national insurance rise. I don't think many people across the country see this as much of a change at all, frankly.
Jenny, you had well-publicised run-ins with Boris Johnson at City Hall when you were on the London Assembly. Are you going to miss him?
Well, in a sense, because he's pure entertainment, so a lot of us did laugh at his jokes in spite of the fact he was a useless Prime Minister. But I don't see Liz Truss as a continuity candidate in quite the same way, because I think she's much more of an ideologue, much more right-wing.
Does she scare you more?
Potentially, because it seems that the ERG, the extreme right wing of the party, has got her in its pocket, and therefore...
Is that right, Paul?
No, absolutely not. I mean, it's ironic because you've got half the media complaining that she actually used to be in Munira Wilson's party, and now you've got Jenny saying that she's ultra right wing. She's not. She is what she is. She's been on a journey, like lots of people do. From having been brought up in a left wing household in Paisley and Leeds, and she's sort of found out for herself through her education, through her employment, through her life experience. That the Conservatives are there for opportunities, and so she is now. You saw in Prime Minister's questions a far more serious PMQs, despite there's a couple of good gags there, but it was all about policy. It was all about what we need to do to deliver.
Paul, before we move on, can I just ask you finally on this? Do you expect to see Boris Johnson back?
No.
That's
no, I mean, look, Boris still, not in terms of that frontline politics. I mean, I suspect most politicians that I meet when they've gone after a little while of getting used to the fact that they've gone, don't want to come back. Frankly, I think Boris will find other things that he's great at, and he will enjoy doing them.
OK, now when the pandemic hit, people left London in their droves. Now they're back and looking for somewhere to live, but with a dwindling supply of property, tough competition and ever-increasing prices, London's rental market isn't exactly welcoming people home.
It was incredibly stressful. I was in tears about it most days.
Hannah has just been through an ordeal all too common to thousands of Londoners. She and her partner were forced to find a new home when their landlords sold up. They're now paying a higher rent for a smaller flat in Tooting. Getting there was traumatic.
You'd show up to viewings and there'd be about 30 people waiting outside, or it'd be like one in, one out. If something comes up, you've got to go and look at it straight away. So that means if you're working from home, you've got to drop everything. I'd go on my bike and rush and try and do a viewing, but it'd be pointless anyway because you probably get outbid.
At the estate agents in Finchley, where he works, Greg sees at first hand the misery of disappointed Londoners unable to find or afford somewhere to rent.
We've seen the ratio of applicants looking to rent rise from 5 to each property to 35 to 1 in less than 12 months. Rents are rising at unprecedented levels because tenants are just outbidding each other in order to secure a home.
Property experts say the rental market is in crisis. Demand has outstripped supply. The number of private landlords is in decline.
We see a punitive tax regime, we see greater regulation. This is not a sexy place for landlords to invest. And the knock-on effect of this, in the absence of any social housing, is that tenants pay more. It's a very simple equation of supply and demand.
The housing shortage means more Londoners are regarded as homeless.
Everyone thinks about homelessness as being rough sleeping, but the sad reality is that rough sleeping is the tip of a very large iceberg, and there are a vast number of people who are either staying with friends or sofa surfing or in some other form of temporary accommodation.
At least Hannah and her partner have a roof over their heads for now, but like many renters, they can't be sure their lease will be renewed. Paul and Munira, you both represent outer London constituencies. Are you familiar with this problem? Are your constituents telling you that there's a crisis?
Yeah, I mean, rents are through the roof, very unaffordable in my part of southwest London. And we heard there in that package that it's putting huge pressure on the social housing supply. And I would say that is probably the number one issue that residents come to me about in terms of both emailing and coming to my surgeries. People who are desperate for social housing because they can't afford to rent in the private sector. And there just isn't the social housing. And week after week, I have to tell people, you're probably going to be waiting years if you're ever even lucky enough to get a home, especially if they're looking for a family home, or if it's a large family in particular.
Yeah.
Well, what are your constituents telling you?
Yeah, I mean, undoubtedly, the private rented sector is getting really squeezed, and so people are finding it incredibly difficult.
The landlords seem to blame your government.
Well, but actually, Sadiq Khan's, the mayor's response is to have rent controls, and that will actually have fewer landlords because you'll have a flee away from property ownership. But so we clearly need to have that supply side. We need to match the demand with building more. But you get in situations, well, I mean, Sutton Council, my own council, they are commendably trying to build 100 new units on a road that they already own all of the properties on. The problem is, for every unit they're building, the build cost is £480,000. That does not cost that much to build a 2-bedroom flat, I tell you. You can actually buy 160 odd properties on the open market for that. So councils have got to stop speculating and get the people that know what they're doing to actually build houses, rather than becoming just speculating in that way.
Jenny, in your years at City Hall, you scrutinised mayors who were responsible for house building in London. What's the problem?
There's lots of problems, and as we've heard, a shortage of social housing is incredibly stressful for councils and for the mayor. And this all comes back to the Tory party policy of right to buy. That was a terrible mistake. And you should now be thinking about building a lot more social housing, and they should be good houses. They should be well insulated. Yeah. I've got a slight sympathy for Paul on this issue of how much it costs to build now, because the shortage of materials really has hit builders
and
hard.
labour.
But it doesn't cost that. But you're right about supply costs. But what I'm saying actually about that example, it does not, even now, it does not cost £480,000 to build each 2-bedroom flat. It's basically councils that are speculate in a way that they're just not experts at doing this, and they're thinking, right, here, I've got to solve a problem, let me get into a pet project, and they get blinkered instead of actually delivering it in a way that's affordable for the taxpayer. And actually it means by only building 100 where they could build 160 for the same amount of money, that's 60 people going without social housing.
Well, one of the things that happened during COVID was that a lot of office buildings were empty, and as far as I know there still are office buildings, and there was talk at the time about refurbishing them as houses, as flats, as homes, and I don't know why that opportunity has sort of
Well, I think one of the things we're also trying to do is make planning permission easier, and that's some of the debate that we're going through at Parliament now, and you'll see some changes, I think.
That's going to cause a huge row in some of your rural
and we've got to get the balance right, because it's trying to make sure that we don't have that insensitive development, that it's good development, as Jenny says, that it works with local communities, but you don't want to have all its technicalities, which just basically backs up lots of planning.
You've
so
got
people
to take the community with you. One of the challenges for building more housing, of course, is lack of sites, particularly in areas like London. It's one of the reasons I've been running a campaign that publicly owned assets that are being sold off, like former police stations. I've got one in my constituency, Teddington Police Station, should be allowed to be sold for slightly below market value, so that we can build social housing rather than flogging it off to luxury flat developers. And I've been lobbying the mayor to allow that to happen with Teddington Police Station. I've now been lobbying Paul because I'm trying to change legislation to allow this to happen. It's a no-brainer. We've got so few sites. If we're selling off public assets, whether it's a police station, whether it's a fire station, whether it's something else, then we should be repurposing those sites for social and affordable housing for our key workers and young people who've grown up in areas such as Twickenham.
Paul, you'd like to see the Conservatives as a party of aspiration, encouraging home ownership, but for Generation Rent, owning a home is pie in the sky, isn't it?
Well, you're right to actually point out the fact that if we are going to talk about that, we've got to make it easy to do so, because otherwise, if people cannot see themselves buying a home, there's no matter how much aspiration we talk about, there's a mismatch there, which is why building more is the only way to try. But levelling up is important, actually, for the rest of the this goes back to the partnership, because actually, if you allow people in other parts of the country to be able to grab opportunities where they live, rather than feeling they're forced to move to London, if they choose to move to London, that's fine, then actually that cools down the housing market in London in itself.
OK, Monday, an important day for policing in London. New Commissioner, Mark Rowley, takes over. Jenny used to be on the Metropolitan Police Authority. What are his priorities? I mean, we've had another shooting of a black man in London.
Well, I think the priorities that he should tackle are probably racism, sexism, misogyny within the police force, because that has all sorts of ramifications for the way that they get out on the streets and the way that they deal with crimes. I suspect that won't be the first thing on his agenda. He is not, I would argue, a particularly enlightened police officer. So we will.
Why do you say that?
I have watched his progress through Scotland and here in London, and I never thought of him as anybody who could be creative and be ambitious and courageous, and that's what you need as police commissioner.
Paul, are you worried about community relations?
I think community relations are hugely important when you talk about policing by consent and making sure that actually you can get because you can then gather intelligence, you can work with the community. That's really, really important. But what Sir Mark needs to do is absolutely get the police back focused on what
this latest shooting is going to be troublesome for him, isn't it?
What it is, I mean, obviously there's an investigation into that, and it's really important that that investigation takes its course. There's not a lot I can say about that, apart from my extreme sympathies, condolences for the family. It's a terribly sad case.
Munira, what's the priority for you?
Well, I do think there has to be a real culture change in the Met Police, given a lot of the scandals we've seen over the last couple of years, which has really rocked, I think, the faith of many members of the public. Not to take away from the rank and file police officers who are doing a sterling job day in, day out, and the police in my neck of the woods are just brilliant, and I engage with the local police leaders all the time, doing a fantastic job. But of course, violent crime is really, we've been seeing that rising all over London, and even in my neck of the woods there was a fatal stabbing just last September of a young student. People want to see action taken on that, but the culture shift is
and
really...
How much responsibility does the Mayor have?
The Mayor of London should not abrogate his responsibilities as our police commissioner in London, because he's very good at wagging a finger at everybody, but he's got to take some responsibility for himself. He is accountable as police commissioner. He's got to set that strategy, and but he also then needs to connect it up with some of the other stuff he's doing. When you're right to talk about safety on the streets, especially women's safety, after Sarah Everard, and then he cuts the night tube, and it's that kind of stuff that give people options to travel more safely.
Well, he is being starved of funds by the government.
To be fair,
he's disingenuous given the challenges with trying to get a deal for TfL.
Well, he was doing that anyway. We've given him £6 billion over the period of COVID anyway, and so what we're not going to do is pay for the excesses and the cost of the cuts that he'd made prior to COVID, but of course we'll keep London moving, and night tubes are really important.
Can I ask you finally, Paul, new Prime Minister, do you think the relationship between number 10 Downing Street and City Hall will be less brittle?
Well, as Minister for London, I hope I can play some role in that, and I know it was good.
Do you get on with Sadiq?
Yeah, we on a day-to-day basis. It's difficult to sometimes deal when I'm hearing how collaborative we're being, and then I know that there's a letter going out via the press to blame the government or something. So it's important we work constructively and focused, and I'm sure he's reaching out. I know, listening to his words. Let's build on that.
Paul, thank you very much. Jenny, thank you very much. Munira, thank you very much. And that's all we've got time for tonight too. Thanks to all my panellists, Jenny, Paul and Munira. I'll be back with another edition of The Late Debate next month after the conferences. Until then, thank you for watching and good night.